Well, good morning. I call the hearing to order. Before we start the hearing, I'd like to recognize Frank Lucas for some conversation about the tragedy in Stillwater. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before we begin the meeting this morning, I want to take a couple of moments to reflect on the tragic events that unfolded at my alma mater at Oklahoma State University this past weekend. As most of you know, a car plowed through a crowd of spectators at the homecoming parade Saturday morning. Our homecoming parade at Oklahoma State is like the biggest high school homecoming you've ever seen in your life. Enthusiasm, massive amounts of alums and supporters and all those little kids up and down the line. Part of the group that was injured, and ultimately 4 of them lost their lives. 2 of those folks who did not survive the crash was a Dr. Marvin Stone and his wife, Bonnie, both long-time employees of Oklahoma State. And it's fitting that we're having this hearing today on big data because Dr. Stone, a Regents Professor of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering at Oklahoma State, was a pioneer in the field. He was integral in developing new precision ag technology such as the Green Seeker technology that helped pave the way for much of the innovation we see in the industry today. And while he retired in 2006, after 24 years of service at Oklahoma State, he remained very active in his profession and ironically was honored just this spring in this very room for his innovations in agriculture. The Division of Agricultural Sciences and Natural Resources at Oklahoma State will be honoring the Stones with a vigil on campus in Stillwater tonight. And I'd ask that you keep all of those who were impacted by this terrible tragedy in your thoughts and prayers in the days ahead as funerals take place, as the survivors who are in critical condition still continue to mend themselves. And Mr. Chairman, I would very respectfully ask if the committee could join me in a moment of silence for all those good folks lost.
Thank you. Please, folks in the audience, join us for the moment of silence. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the multitude of blessings you bestowed upon us, including the blessing of peace that passeth understanding. We ask for healing and comfort on those injured in the tragedy at Oklahoma State this past weekend. Comfort for the grieving and healing for those that need to be healed. Please be with that whole community and help them deal with this senseless tragedy. We also ask for wisdom, knowledge, and guidance that we might govern this great people. That we have big decisions to be made this week. We ask for that wisdom and discernment that we may make those that honor you and that our service will further your kingdom here on earth. Be with us this morning as we have this hearing. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, good morning, everyone. Call the Committee on Agriculture to hearing on big data and agriculture. The innovation and implications will come to order. Information technology is profoundly impacting every aspect of our lives. In so many ways, it's a good thing, but as anyone who's had their identity stolen can tell you, it's not without its downsides. The same, of course, is true in the case of production agriculture. As we've learned in previous hearings, foreign countries do a lot to give their producers a leg up over the competition. By way of example, along with lower worker, consumer, environmental standards, we've witnessed other countries manipulate their currencies, set up state trading enterprises, use subsidies, tariffs, and other non-tariff barriers to gain an upper hand in this competition. But we too have some distinct advantages going for us. Some, like our infrastructure, are tangible, easy to see, while others, like a strong rule of law and a great entrepreneurial spirit, are usually just taken for granted. But every now and again, a game changer comes along, and we in America have had an excellent track record of inventing them and using them early to our great advantage. This record has helped keep America's farmers and ranchers out in front of the pack. The United States has led the way in several major agricultural game changers, including the moldboard plow, the cotton gin, refrigeration, and the Green Revolution. Not long ago, we celebrated the addition of Norman Borlaug's statue to the Capitol. Of course, Dr. Borlaug's Green Revolution was a huge game changer, introducing innovations that have saved billions of lives. And thanks to Dr. Borlaug, we are well positioned to be able to feed the 9 billion people who will soon inhabit our planet. And will meet this challenge using far fewer natural resources and inputs. Today, many believe that Information technology, or big data as it's been called, is the next big game changer for agriculture. Thanks to significant investments in precision agriculture technology by those companies represented here today, as well as countless others, producers now have more information about their farms at their fingertips than ever before. Big data, what seems like boundless potential to improve the efficiency, profitability, and competitiveness of our nation's farmers and ranchers while conserving natural resources and benefiting the environment. In fact, the benefits of big data have already been paying off, as we will hear about today. But at least one of the reasons why potential benefits have not yet been fully realized is because farmers and ranchers are getting lots of information from lots of different places. Getting all this information into one place where it can be easily accessed and used is critically important. And I'm pleased, very pleased that Billy Tiller, who is from our part of the country, is here today to talk about this impediment and how he and other farmers are working to find farmer-friendly solutions in overcoming it. Beyond practical considerations, however, is the important question of how to protect producer privacy and private property rights. Thankfully, the law protects the privacy of most producer information that the USDA gathers. But of course, it does not cover information gathered by private entities. This has enormous implications that can, among other things, affect the commodities market, land values, and how farm policies operate, and potentially expose producers to frivolous and costly environmental litigation. My hope is the committee and our exceptional panel of witnesses will fully explore these and perhaps other relevant issues. But in closing, I want to go back to what I think is a central point, and that is the fact that it is the farmer's information. And as such, the farmer should own or at bare minimum control information about his operation. If we can achieve this important principle, I think we'll go a long way in ensuring that American agriculture harnesses the power of big data. With that, I'll recognize the ranking member for any comments that he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm welcome today's witnesses to the committee, and I'm looking forward to your testimony. There are a lot of interesting things happening with big data and agriculture, and they all have the potential to provide huge benefits, not just to farmers, but consumers, to the economy as a whole. Adopting new technologies can make farming more efficient, enabling farmers to make wise use of inputs and help to keep their costs low. Technology can also help connect farmers with local businesses and consumers, opening up potential new business opportunities. Of course, there are concerns about these advances, particularly when it comes to privacy, and this is something I think we're going to have to keep an eye on. But I'm encouraged that our commodity groups and agriculture technology providers have started a productive dialogue, and I hope that that relationship continues and that we can learn more about these efforts during today's testimony. One final point, I think we need to take a look at what's happening with rural broadband. All of this technology is great, but it's not going to do anybody any good if we don't have reliable broadband. We made a lot of progress, but there are still huge parts of the country that don't have reliable service. And in spite of all of the money that we've spent trying to get broadband into unserved areas, people continue to overbuild existing systems and spend the money places that, in my opinion, they shouldn't. Somehow or another, we need to take this universal service fund away from telephones and put it into broadband and do what we did back in the 30s, where we get it to every house. And somehow or another, we got to figure out how to do this. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of interesting points for us to discuss today, and I thank our witnesses for appearing before this committee, and yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that witnesses may begin their testimony to ensure that there is ample time for questions. Now recognize Ms. Hartzler to introduce our first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very honored to be able to introduce our first witness, my friend and Missouri Farm Bureau President Blake Hurst. Mr. Hurst, or Blake, farms in northwest Missouri. He has a 2-acre greenhouse with his wife, Julie, and daughter and 2 sons. But he is also more than just a farmer and a leader of the Farm Bureau in the state. He's also a very accomplished writer, and he is his articles, he has a gift of humor as well as getting his point across. And he has been featured in Wall Street Journal, Weekly Standard, Reader's Digest, Missouri Farm Bureau's Show Me magazine, and many more publications. And he's certainly a leader among the American Farm Bureau Federation and on issues relating to farmer data, and was one of our main pivotal voices last summer on my farm tour, where we had a session dealing with big data. So I very much appreciate him and the honor to be able to introduce him today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And we also have Mr. Billy Tiller, the Director of Business Development, co-founder of Grower Information Services Cooperative in Lubbock, Texas. Dr. Michael Stern, President, Chief Operating Officer of the Climate Corporation, the Vice President of Monsanto, San Francisco, California. Mr. Matt Rushing, who's the Vice President, Product Line Advanced Technology Solutions, AGCO, Duluth, Georgia. And Dr. Shannon Farrell, Associate Professor and Faculty Teaching Fellow, Agricultural Law Department of Agricultural Economics, Oklahoma State University, Stillwater, Oklahoma. And Dr. Farrell expressed our condolences on the death of your brother this past week, and our prayers for you and your family as you go through that circumstances. Thank you for being here this morning. Mr. Hirsch, would you care to begin? 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congresswoman Hartzler, for the warm welcome. Thank you, Chairman Conway and Ranking Member Peterson, for holding this hearing. I'm honored to represent Missouri Farm Bureau and the American Farm Bureau Federation and share our members' views on big data, including in my written testimony is an article I wrote a couple years ago on the topic. Big data will lead to as much change in agriculture as the Green Revolution or biotechnology. Farmers have had access to precision technology for a number of years, but significant strides have been made in data collection and in analytics. As a result, farmers using the technology are reporting higher yields, fewer inputs, more efficiency, less strain on the environment, and higher profits. Yet many are also expressing concerns about privacy, security, portability, and transparency in how their data is used and who exactly has access. The questions about the new technology can be grouped into the following categories. Transparency. What information is being collected? Will the Ag ATP or Ag Technical Provider notice me, the farmer, if its policies and or procedures change? With whom does the ATP share the information? Who else can obtain my data? Can I delete my data from a database? Can I easily switch among providers, which is a huge question? Am I the gatekeeper to data access? Of course, who is liable if there's a data breach? And is there value to this data in my farm, and can I capture some of that data? Can I be paid for the data? In early 2014, Farm Bureau invited 6 farm and commodity groups and 6 ag technology providers to meet to see if we could find a solution to the farmers' concern. We worked several months to develop 13 principles of data privacy and security, which are included in my written testimony. Farmers prefer this teamwork approach over regulatory or legislative fix because we believe the market will provide the process to address problems if farmers have an equal footing with agribusinesses. If we rely on the government to make changes, undue overhead may well irreversibly deter innovation. However, while we are not advocating for government involvement in regulating big data, our farmers are extremely interested in having the government be a data-driven partner so they can more easily use electronic technologies to access and utilize USDA programs, such as having a one-stop sign-up for programs across multiple agencies like Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, Risk Management Agency. Through technology, the government can enable progress and efficiency. USDA needs better data technology and the authority and resources to use them to drive value for farmers' data. If we can accomplish that, we will jointly drive innovation, reduce economic burden on farmers, and reduce costs for USDA. You will note that we started this process with 12 participants, and we have moved on from the beginning. We've had 35 different organizations sign on to our agreement. The first thing we did was set up a transparency evaluator. We agreed to be useful to help farmers understand the documents they signed with ATPs and ag service providers, and to do so without hiring a lawyer. Consequently, we've developed a transparency evaluator. I would describe it as a combination of a consumer reports review and a good housekeeping seal of approval. Before signing contracts, farmers should understand what will become of the data collected from their operation, including whether it is accessible to a Freedom of Information Act request, whether it's accessible to government agencies without permission, and whether it could be used to speculate in the commodities market. Farmers need to be able to determine the benefits and relationship outweigh the privacy and security risks. We've also done work on ag data repositories. Today, most farm experts believe that 80% of the data we collect never leaves the tractor or combine or is never entered into a database. A data repository will be developed so it's akin to a bank where one is free to deposit and withdraw data at will, a place where farmers can store their data for later use. While FBF has not endorsed any ag data repository, we are working with some which are being developed so that producers have an opportunity to store their data in an open, neutral network. And we hope that one or more data repositories follow the principles in our data privacy and security document. We've had some skepticism about farmers about data repositories. The biggest concerns are security, providing agribusiness companies with one more avenue to sell to us, increase our costs, a belief that farmer data has value, and by simply offering it to a repository, we may not be able to capture that value. And if data is stored in an individual company database, it's often difficult and not impossible to move to a different provider. In summary, the increasingly important role of prescription agriculture and big data offers significant opportunities for farmers and ranchers. However, we must do everything we can to ensure producers own and control their data, can transparently ascertain what happens to the data, and have the ability to store the data in a safe and secure location. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Mr. Tiller.
It's a pleasure to be here today. Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, the committee. My name is Billy Tiller. I'm actually a cotton farmer, grain farmer from Texas. And even though I work with and help found Grower Information Services Cooperative, that's how I would characterize myself. In fact, today, the weather's not right in Texas and hadn't been the last week or so, but as I leave, it cleared up, so my guys are quickly in the fields and I'm not there. So my mind's drifting a little back to the farm in Texas. But what I want to talk about today is the fact that we're here on big data. And let me sort of tell you what happened. Back in 2010, really it was a few farmers working together, and we were talking about just the simple thing that it was difficult to move our data around. An example would be we had crop insurance, and we're trying to move our production data to our crop agent, and it wasn't a simple task. I mean, I would have to go over at reams of paper that I'm hand delivering to crop insurance agents that they're rekeying into systems. And I actually had brought that data from a system where it was in a SQL Server database. So my point is, I was moving it, and actually it was difficult to move. So we were trying to actually streamline that process. Along the way of working with that, we started to identify some problems. And some problems I really hadn't started out thinking about. And those were problems of my own operation, which is about 6,000 acres. It's not one of the largest operations. And yet I was having difficulty with integration. And what I mean by that, I had many different systems that I was operating on the farm, and it was very difficult for me to integrate any of this data together to actually get, I wasn't thinking big data, I'm just trying to get an analytical view of my own operation. And so what happened, I had a very incomplete data set because I had all these silos of data. In fact, on page 5 of the report, the testimony I gave you, I have a slide there, and I'd like to add one more silo there. One I forgot that I was thinking about yesterday is just paperwork. I have all this paper. We're digitizing a lot of it in my office today, but it's a silo of data that is missing there. But it's very hard to integrate and make good decisions when you can't bring all the data together. And so what was going on in 2010 and what's going on today are the exact same problems. It hasn't gotten fixed. And we've been working diligently around the problem. And what we did to actually try to fix the problem in our own sense, we formed a cooperative called Growers Information Services Cooperative, much like the repositories that Blake was talking about. We are attempting to store data, and we've really just got our system up and running where we can do that. It's been a long process. And where we can store data centrally, begin to look at a view that's across platforms, not create all the tools for the market, but let the market create those tools, but let us store them in a central location. The other thing that the cooperative brought was we wanted to geospatially reference this information. Now, there's a land layer that lies at Farm Service Agency that they created, and really is an unbelievable task they went about to create the Common Land Unit. It is what we run our farm programs against, and also the same land layers used now to really, with the approved insurance providers, to operate our crop insurance. So we have map-based acreage reporting, and we went down that road. It's a great geospatial way to reference things. It's a standard that we needed in agriculture, and so we chose that map to bear a standard. Now, as I move forward, that's the reasons we did it, along with now we can see big data, and could we share revenues as growers together around the safety and privacy around data. What about data privacy? Let me say this. There's machine data out there, and this is very disconcerting to me, that when I buy a machine, I might not always own the data that might come off my machine. I can't hardly believe that. I paid money for this. It'd be like you buying a Kodak camera back in the day and then realizing that Kodak might want the pictures off the camera. It doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think it makes sense to you either. You should own the data if you bought the controller. And so there are those things around data ownership. Also, I'd like to say that the landscape's changing. I mean, quickly quickly changing. And what I mean by that is think about how quickly we went from smartphones to where we're talking about the cloud, and that's just been in the last 2 or 3 years. So as I talk to you today, the committee, I want to compliment what's went on in the prior farm bills. And in 2008, Section 1619 set out to protect us as farmers around the geospatial information on our farm. And I would ask y'all to continue in that. I would ask that you continue to safeguard that information. I think it should be allowed to be gotten to by the farmer. And that's what we're working to actually use that. We use that information at GIC because we step into the shoes of the grower. And we've got an MOU with USDA where we've been working diligently to decide how can you get real-time data into farmers' hands. And USDA needs help there, we need help there. So I think there's a great partnership going on between the two of us. And I can see that work continuing to move forward into the future. So I would summarize by saying, please continue your work around privacy, understanding also that that we don't need bumper rails, and I think y'all know that. We want innovation, but somebody has to protect this, and we'd like FSA to continue to update the common land unit layer and do those things around that. So anyway, I have a lot more at the end of my testimony, but 4 points I'd like you can read those, but thank you for the time here.
Thank you, Mr. Tiller. Mr. Stern, or Dr. Stern, excuse me, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, and members of the committee for inviting me to participate in today's hearing. Your interest in the use of grower data and farm data analysis comes at an exciting time as agricultural data technology is being made available to farmers in ways that's never been done before. We are on the cusp of a digital revolution in production agriculture, driven by the digitization of farm information that will drive a new wave of agricultural innovation and productivity. The mission of the Climate Corporation is to help all the world's farmers sustainably increase productivity through the use of digital tools. Accordingly, the Climate Corporation looks at the actions farmers take every day and the roughly 40 big decisions that farmers make every year on their farm. For example, what type of seeds to plant, where and when to plant those seeds, what is the optimal seeding population, and when and how much fertilizer should be applied, just to mention a few. The use of data can provide important fact-driven information and insights to farmers to enable them to maximize yield, optimize their use of resources, and save money. What you might refer to as farmer data or precision agriculture is what I think about as digital agriculture. By using data science and software engineering, we transform data into insights for growers to help them make more informed decisions about what's happening in each part of each field. Our proprietary Climate Field View platform uses real-time and historic crop and weather data to deliver customized insights that help farmers make important agronomic decisions with confidence. So how do we actually do this? By combining publicly and privately available information on weather, soil, and land with agronomic practices and farm equipment information provided by our farmer customers, we build complex models to analyze all this data and provide insights for farmers to help them make real-time decisions that will result in greater efficiencies and increased productivity. All of this means that we are analyzing a vast amount of data for the farmer to help distill that information into usable insights. For example, we have developed our Nitrogen Advisor to monitor the movement of nitrogen-based fertilizers through the field from fall application to spring planting and beyond. This digital tool will provide insights to help farmers determine whether they have sufficient fertility in the field during the growing season to meet their yield objectives. Our Field Health Advisor uses satellite imagery to provide high-contrast digital maps that help farmers spot trends and potential problems in their fields before they impact yield. The end result is to provide growers with more data-driven information to more sustainably increase the productivity of their operations. As a company that will utilize our farmer customer data in the course of developing these transformational digital tools, we take our commitment to safeguarding that data very seriously. In June of 2014, the Climate Corporation published our data privacy policy, which is customer-focused, transparent, and makes it clear what we will and won't do with farmer data. Our policy states that the company will make it easy for farmers to control who can access the data they provide and for what purpose. We will only use a farmer's data to deliver and improve the services for which they are subscribing. We will ensure safeguards are in place to protect farmer information from outside parties. We will not sell customer data provided to third parties. The farmer owns this data. And finally, we will enable farmers to easily remove the data from our systems if they choose to no longer do business with us. In addition, about a year ago, we endorsed a set of principles for data privacy that we and other industry participants developed with the American Farm Bureau. We are proud of the work that was accomplished, and we are pleased that our collaboration with grower organizations and other companies continues as we create a system to verify for our customers that we are meeting the standards we have endorsed. The promise of digital agriculture is to help American farmers and farmers around the world to more sustainably convert natural resources into food. It's why we are in business. We believe that the digital ag revolution and the Climate Corporation's unique technologies will drive innovation to help achieve these important goals. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you this morning.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of AGCO Corporation. AGCO supports more productive farming across every phase of the crop cycle through a full line of equipment, precision farming technologies, and services. Nearly 700 of our 3,100 dealers are located here in the United States and support AGCO's vision to deliver high-tech solutions for professional farmers feeding the world. We are at a hinge point in global agriculture. Growers must increase food production, as you know, between now and 2050 by 60 to 70% in order to feed the growing population. We must do all this with less. Precision farming technologies are focused on inputs and environmental impacts while optimizing the farm operation and lowering growers' input costs, improving overall efficiency, and maintaining stewardship of the land. Advanced sensors and sensor fusion continue to enable better data acquisition, better insights into input deployment and yield. Cloud computing and wireless connectivity allows for more efficient analysis and more granular management of land, machines, and inputs. These technologies create a tremendous amount of data that's not always fully utilized by growers. We submit to the committee that smart, connected farm equipment and growers' ability to effectively manage and use this data is at the forefront of the next farming revolution. Machinery that collects it, farm managers and agronomists who can analyze it, and on and off-board technologies that transfer it, read it, and put it into action will be the next tools farmers use to unlock the value of their data. So harnessing this data has the potential to be the next big driver from farm productivity gains, similar to the transition we saw 100 years ago when we moved from horses to machinery. With these developments must come shared standards for accessing, processing, and ownership of this data. Expansion of rural broadband, which was mentioned earlier, internet access, which enables farm equipment connectivity, is very critical. Progression towards and adherence to industry-wide farm data formats and quality standards enables growers to effectively work with agricultural service providers to increase farm efficiency. Ownership is another key piece of this farm data discussion. AGCO and many other leaders in the industry assert that the farmer owns and should have control and responsibility for the data generated by his or her operation. Aside from the technical barriers, farmers must perceive the value of big data in their operations. Like any other industry going through a similar big data conversion or revolution, stakeholders must see to believe. Adoption of precision farming tools and services is driving the realization that data benefits and has a return on investment. Agricultural equipment and service providers must continue to demonstrate the value of data and make it tangible across a wide variety of operations that exist. Data on its own is not valuable. Given these challenges, it is up to us as leaders in the industry to develop and advocate for technology that achieves a secure and standardized and adaptable environment. Before we can do all that, we must demystify this area of big data. We must educate the industry and growers themselves on what farm data is and how it can effectively be used. AGCO's focus is on helping growers make sense of their data and in keeping it private so they can use it how they want to maximize its potential. We are implementing strategic focuses around the world on developing equipment that is accurately recording the data parameters required for farm managers to engage in analytics and enable better decision making. while ensuring the smart equipment can implement management plans derived from the data. To respect the growers' data privacy choices, we've also chosen to transmit the data in two ways, through two pipelines, one machine data and one for more sensitive agronomic data. We call this strategic initiative FUSE, AGCO's open approach to precision agriculture that optimizes the farm. AGCO applauds the committee for highlighting this important topic. It's an exciting time to be part of the agricultural industry. New technology and innovations and ways to utilize data are propelling growers' productivity and efficiency. We're experiencing an unprecedented level of cooperation among farmer advocacy groups, industry associations, biotech companies, equipment manufacturers, and technology providers, all coming together to help growers utilize the data to better feed the world. We look forward to your continued support. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. And now, Dr. Farrell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Peterson, and the members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you, and I also want to commend you for your wisdom. You put the lawyer at the end, which indicates to me you've probably done this before. I also want to echo the comments of the chairman and Congressman Lucas with respect to Dr. Stone, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the impact that Dr. Stone had on me. We're having this conversation today largely because of some of the work that Dr. Stone did. In addition to the accomplishments that Congressman Lucas raised to our attention, Dr. Stone was also instrumental in developing SAE Standard J1939, which sounds like a bunch of alphabet soup, but it's the framework upon which machine data is basically built and transmitted, and so we really wouldn't be having this conversation today without Dr. Stone's work. As the congressman alluded to also, my brother passed away earlier this week, but I wanted to come here and speak today in spite of that because the last conversation I had with him was about how we could apply some of these principles to his cattle marketing strategies. And so I thought it was fitting for the memory of both Dr. Stone and my brother that I come speak to you today. Many of the previous speakers have already made many of the points I was going to make about the opportunities that big data provides and some of the parameters of the consensus-driven discussions that we've had in the industry, which I'm very encouraged by. So I'm going to move my comments more directly towards a couple of the legal questions that I think that are on everyone's mind with respect to this data. Number one, what does the law really have to say currently about the ownership of agricultural data? And number two, what protections are out there for the privacy of that data generated and shared by farmers and ranchers? So on the first point of whether the law really gives us an ownership interest in agricultural data, I will give the classic law professor answer of it depends, which I know is kind of a punt, but I'll put it this way. In the regime of federal law, the trademark, patent, and copyright, there's really no good fit for agricultural data. It really just doesn't have any protection under those various umbrellas. And so what we would then look to would be to state law, and specifically the Uniform Trade Secret Act. And one could make an argument, although it's not necessarily a slam dunk argument, that agricultural data could be protected under state law as a trade secret. However, that's not really, again, a very clear fit. And so if Congress chose to act on that and to enhance those protections, one thing that could be done would be to perhaps adapt the Uniform Trade Secret Act on a federal level, or provide a more clear legal definition of where agricultural data fits in the concepts provided by the UTSA, and provide a more clear protection of agricultural data within that framework. On the privacy side, there really isn't a good fit under federal law for agricultural data either. Health information has HIPAA, financial information has Graham-Leach-Bliley and the Fair Credit Reporting Act, but agricultural data really has no place to go at the federal level to find any level of privacy protection. So ways that Congress could address that issue are, number one, to enact legislation that clearly and narrowly defines the circumstances under which disclosure of agricultural data can be compelled by federal agencies, and also those circumstances under which federal agencies would be allowed to disclose that information, specifically with regard to the Freedom of Information Act. And number two, to strengthen the safeguards that would prevent inadvertent disclosure of agricultural data held by federal agencies, or then authorized access to that data by other parties. And again, I think that the current consensus process is doing a good job of developing those protections on the private side, and I really think Congress should lend its support to that action as well. We really have seen tremendous strides through collaboration with all the stakeholders in this industry, and I think that Congress could also be very well served and could advance the cause of big data's adoption in agriculture if we support those public consensus-driven efforts led by American Farm Bureau Federation and lots of the service providers in the industry. With that, I want to again extend my appreciation to Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson and the members of the committee, and I greatly appreciate this opportunity and look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I would remind the chair, would remind other members that there will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I appreciate members' understanding. And with that, I'll now chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Tiller, one of the big concerns, you know, in West Texas and in other parts of the country is obviously water. And one of the things I think is exciting about, data that we're gathering is, how we can more efficiently utilize that in the future and make sure that we're using that resource in a appropriate way, both environmentally but also financially, because when you're running those wells, it is costing money. But could you kind of just briefly describe, some of the technology out there and how producers could utilize that?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of technology today that I've seen more in the last couple of years around, especially when we're talking center pivot irrigation, drip irrigation, to actually monitor, operate those pivots in ways where should you irrigate, should you not. I've often said that when we get to binary decisions, when you have a yes, no, should the pivot be on or not, and that's going to come about because of algorithms that come out of various companies. I think many times we need to look harder at the bottom line. It's very hard when you've got limited water like West Texas. There may only be 300 gallons, a minute that you can pump and you're trying to irrigate this field. It's not a lot of water, but I think there are ways to look at the bottom line using data really to decide in this pivot, in this area of land, can we maximize profitability, not yield? Can we maximize profitability? And that's only answered with the right numbers. I'm very encouraged as I talk to growers. They understand we're in hard times, and the best way we can handle these issues is to understand these underlying costs. And so with that said, that's going to be data-driven. There's a lot of devices quickly that have to do with, measuring soil moisture. There's devices that measure temperature in the canopy. All these things can be used to help these guys with the irrigation.
And so obviously the more data that we can gather from a broader spectrum, the more important that information is and more useful it is. What are some of the impediments that y'all are finding to getting producers to embrace this technology and, more importantly, wanting to share their data?
In our part of the world, because there is such limited water and it's not in great capacities, many growers don't employ that exact technology that I'm talking about because they think that I only have so much water. Gee, I couldn't manage it anyway. When am I going to cut it off? But I'm starting to see some that are telling neighbors. It's sort of word of mouth. Someone realizes that someone's getting a head up by actually employing some of those. I've been in Nebraska, great grower there that employs a ton of technology. And but he has a lot more water to work with. But with that said, with better weather data analytics, deciding when it might rain and actually understanding weather patterns better, integrating those things back into the system, I think that's going to be a game changer in trying to save water. But again, I think it's profitability down at that land layer when we're going to decide how do we plant this and save our water resource and be profitable at the same time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we were, I think it was maybe Mr. Rushing, or I can't remember which, who was talking about, there's kind of two sets of data out there. There's the financial data, and then there's the operational data. And obviously being able to integrate both of those pieces of information is important to, using it to be, as you mentioned, more profitable. And so in the future, as you're collecting the operational data, that subset is used for certain kind of purposes in the financial. So how do we, when we start granting access, how are we going to petition that where the producer can look at his data and he can look at other people's data, but not attributed to one individual and making that proprietary? Who wants to? Dr. Stern?
Yes. And I think you've characterized it well, that there's different, and it's probably more than just two sets of data. Ultimately, we believe this has to be a decision that's made by the grower around what data needs to be shared. And then it's the responsibility of us in the industry or others associated with receiving that data to make sure that the data that they're getting is used for the purposes under which they've agreed for us to use it. The question then is, can you get more value by aggregating a lot of that data? And I think when you talk to growers, I think they're very, very open to the concept of aggregating and anonymizing data because they recognize that that can bring benefits back to their farm. You know, anecdotally, when I talk to growers, they say, hey, look, I don't want you to sell to anybody. I don't want marketers calling me at dinner time, those types of things. But if you can do things by aggregating data that's going to help me be more productive, you know, I'm really willing to do that. So I think the framework and that understanding at the grower level is there.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Peterson, for 5 minutes.
Thank the gentleman. I don't even know where to start. As somebody that's tried to, you know, get USDA to be able to talk to each other, even within the department, you know, and this frustrate, you know, I'm just concerned about how we're going to come up with a format that is available to everybody that's standard. You know, it looks like everybody's kind of going off in different directions, which is a problem, I think, you know, and I don't know, are they moving, are you guys moving all this data to the cloud? Because that's where this is going to end up. Is that going on? Instead of trying to put it on servers, individual servers and whatever?
Yeah, absolutely that, when you think about where the data is going, ultimately it's going to be going to the cloud. And with respect to the Climate Corporation, it's going to the Climate Corporation cloud. There needs to be a mechanism by which across the industry there's easy movement of data. It gets back to the concept that a grower owns their data and they should be able to transfer it from one cloud to the other. If they're working with us one year, they're working with AGCO, whatever it is. And so there needs to be standards. We've proposed something called the Open Ag Data Alliance that begins to set standards very similar to the broader software industry around how data can move freely from, if you will, one cloud to the other. So I think
So you're beginning that?
we are beginning that.
It's not, how far along is it?
I would still say it's in early days. I think we have a bunch of companies working with that. It's being actually run out of Purdue University. But it's early days in the system. But for this to be really efficient and to be able to allow growers to do what they need to do.
Are you going to be able to incorporate the information that some of these companies are now developing with drones, which I think is probably the most exciting thing that's happened here? Is that going to be able to be integrated into this?
Absolutely. I think the concept of being able to use drones in agriculture is something that we need to think seriously about. How do we allow growers to be able to access that technology safely and appropriately? But I think it will be a game changer with respect to
That's a whole other
data.
question of how we keep these yahoos from screwing up this thing that are flying these things around and causing
Exactly.
trouble.
Yes.
But the other thing I'm concerned about, there's a lot of information out there that's it's going to get wound into this regarding the environmental issues. And, you know, we've just got this terrible fight going on. You know, we are, in my opinion, we're making huge progress in agriculture in terms of developing technology and so forth. But frankly, in the environmental area, these people are trying to go back 200 years. And, you know, and that's what they're pushing is no technology. You know, that it's got to be natural. We've got a fight going on in Minnesota over buffer zone strips to clean water quality when the best thing we could do is tile the land, and they're fighting us on that. You know, so how do we get these environmental people to start using technology, you know, to help the environment instead of fighting us, instead of saying that the only way this is going to be good is if we go back to the Buffalo Commons and have everything in grass and buffalo running around, you know?
Well, and one means of addressing that, and one of the most exciting promises of big data is the fact that it allows for regional compliance amongst producers when it comes to environmental issues to really be a true possibility. For example, if we had the kind of sensing technologies that we've talked about today at the farm level and can integrate that information at a more regional level through some of the big data aggregation technologies that Dr. Stern was mentioning, we could really have, I think, meaningful impact on non-point source pollution issues, which is something that we've struggled with for a long time, and we've been making strides with incentive-based approaches, and I think the incentive-based approach is a good way to do that, but we have a way of giving the incentive-based approach real teeth if we can have a level of regional coordination that allows farmers to do much better farm-level nutrient management that in turn provides regional results. And I think that's one of the really exciting promises that this has for environmental compliance in agriculture.
Do you think these ideologues that have their mind made up about everything are going to pay attention to the actual data and not just go off on their tangents?
Hope springs eternal, sir.
Mr.
Yeah, one of the points I guess I would like to make, and maybe for people, I think we're assuming a level of knowledge here that may not be, everybody may not have. The first thing you need to understand about this is it cuts our use of inputs in a very, very real sense. We have a yield record from a certain place in the field for 5 or 10 years. We find out that that place is less productive than the average place in the field, and now I have the ability to shut any input that I'm applying to that place in the field. I use less because it will be ineffective there. So it's a huge environmental
Well, I
advantage.
understand that. The problem is, we've got a lot of folks in the environmental community that do not want to recognize this.
Sure.
That's the problem. And, you know, I don't know what we do to bring those people into the 21st century, but that's a whole nother fight. Yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Dr. Farrell. Just for the sake of our colleagues here, you and I are a little bit different in age, but raised at two different ends of the same highway in western Oklahoma. Could you expand for a moment on your earlier comments? You're in a position where you teach, where you interact with the constituents back in Oklahoma at Oklahoma State. What kind of questions are you getting from the folks back home about these very issues, and how are you responding to those questions?
Well, and I think the questions that we're seeing in western Oklahoma are largely indicative of the questions that I've heard from the other witnesses here today. I think farmers are excited about the opportunities that big data analytics can provide them, and that's tempered a little bit by their trepidation in that they don't really understand the mechanics of how that works, and we're kind of inherently private. Farmers and ranchers, are very kind, generous, hardworking people, but sometimes they don't want everyone else knowing their business, and there's just, I think, a lack of understanding about what someone else is able to discern about my business when I participate in one of the systems that we're talking about today. And I think realistically, there shouldn't be a lot of concern, because when we're talking about the aggregation technologies at use, we see that aggregation actually protects anonymity of the individual producer. So I think their concerns are very understandable and well-founded, but I think that for the most part, we can address those through education. I think if the more that farmers and ranchers understand the mechanics of how data is shared and analyzed, they'd see that a lot of those concerns don't have to be concerns for them. And I think that's really important, because we have kind of a chicken and the egg issue wrapped in a trust issue, in that for big data to really work, it's got to be big. We have to have large numbers of producers that are willing to share their data in these large, robust data sets for us to really get that advantage. And the irony in that is that you can see more insights about your own farm, as Mr. Hurst was saying, by looking at lots of other farms as well. And so I think education is going to be a big piece of that. I've devoted a lot of my work to educating the farmers and ranchers on the legal side of things. What really are your legal rights with respect to your data? How do you protect those? And, as I mentioned earlier, I think the public dialogue that we've had has been excellent. And I think the next step is for us to continue that dialogue and to move from the principles that we've had established through the Farm Bureau dialogue and start maintaining, the dialogue with our service providers to see those principles are actually integrated into the agreements, those legally binding service agreements that farmers and ranchers are signing on to, and that we also educate farmers and ranchers about how to read those things. Not everybody reads their iTunes use agreement when they want to download that next app, but you're agreeing to everything that says, and I think you got to take some time to actually read the fine print on that, and hopefully we'll help them do that reading.
You mentioned your open testimony, the potential need for statute changes, whether federal or at whatever level, to help facilitate this. You wear a hat both as an Ag Econ professor and as an attorney. How focused should we be, and how aggressive should we be thinking about those kind of statutory issues, or is that still just a little bit away until some other things clarify themselves?
Well, I think that, again, I've been tremendously encouraged by the efforts that the stakeholders in the industry have undertaken to really advance that dialogue, and I think very quickly, too, in that space. I think perhaps the low-hanging fruit for Congress is to address some of the data concerns that farmers have with respect to data held by federal agencies. I think the EPA lawsuit of a couple of years ago, where we saw a lot of information from our livestock operations put out there, I think the disclosure of lots of the farm subsidy information by the Environmental Working Group has led to farmers having a little bit of trepidation about that information. And so I think one of the ways to enhance the trust level, at least on the federal side, is to perhaps more clearly delineate what information is and is not subject to FOIA requests that farmers are transmitting to agencies like FSA, NRCS, et cetera, and to really make clear what information that the federal government can and cannot request for production from those public service providers as well.
Thank you, Dr. Farrell. Yield back balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Dilbean, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Really appreciate it. My district's a good example. My district is home to a lot of big technology companies, as well as a lot of agriculture, a lot of specialty crop agriculture, and we are already seeing some of the merger there. I think one thing that is incredibly important for folks to understand is technology isn't kind of its own separate area anymore. It is kind of basic infrastructure, and we need to think of it as basic infrastructure in the types of businesses that we're running, but also understand how best to use that. And as someone who worked in technology for many years, I think as the talk about developing standards is something that we've gone through many times before, and hopefully can inform some of the work that all of you are doing to make sure we're doing the right things in this area in particular. I think this hearing also shows that privacy is definitely not an issue of any one particular industry. It is an issue that we have, and is not just a technology issue, it's everyone's issue. Just like bulk collection of information from an ordinary citizen by a federal agency has been a great concern and something we focused on in the other committee I'm on, the Judiciary Committee, so would the collection of precision agriculture data and the release of that data. Dr. Farrell, you talk about a few things in your written testimony as well. We know that for digital information, we don't always have the same standards of protection of digital information that we do of physical information, which is why we've seen some folks more concerned about information going into the cloud or being used digitally. One example you bring up is the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. That was a law that was written in 1986. A lot has changed since 1986, especially about the way we communicate electronically, yet we still have not updated that law. And so can you tell me a little bit how updates to laws like electronic communications privacy and others would have an impact and potentially help folks feel more comfortable with big data and technology in agriculture?
Well, and certainly, and you make a very good point where actually, too, number one, things have changed a little bit in information communication since 1986. And number two, people have privacy concerns almost omnidirectionally. I kind of wonder how Facebook knows what I just searched on Amazon. I thought that seems kind of weird. And so this is a concern with respect to agricultural data that is unique to agriculture, but it's indicative of concerns that I think cut across almost all industry sectors and private individuals as well. And so I think one of the struggles that we face going forward if we want to enhance some of the statutory protections on privacy is defining what is agricultural data. Because we could argue that it's unique in that it contains information that is generated by a producer and their activities, their management decisions on the farm, and that's provided to a service provider in the expectation that they're going to receive a direct benefit from that. You can make an analogy to your Amazon purchasing history in that, well, I went to Amazon, I wanted to get these products, and so those products provide a benefit to me, but then Amazon has that information, uses it to make suggested sales, in some ways may share that information with other organizations, and then I kind of start to feel a little bit differently about that. So agricultural data has some similarities with that, but also has some uniqueness, and the particular problem that we face is, do we want to do that on an industry-by-industry basis? Or is the better approach to step back a little bit and say, well, what protections do we want to have in place for what we might basically call consumer-generated data? That's your Amazon purchasing history. That may include your farm's data. But we could also argue that includes your financial reporting data and your credit score, things of that sort. So we really, I think, need to have a dialogue about what are the rights of the individual with respect to data generated by their activity, but perhaps collected by a third party, whether that's directly or indirectly. And
Now,
so I think it's
a warrant standard probably for digital data like we have for physical data might also kind of be another place we can start.
I would definitely agree with that.
Dr. Stern, you talked about some of the standards that were being developed, and when we talk about security in particular, and also a lot of these standards, they're moving targets, right? We're getting new technologies. What you might think is the most secure infrastructure you could put in place today may change tomorrow. How are you adapting those, knowing that this is a dynamic environment and things are going to be continually changing?
Sure. At the Climate Corporation, we have a dedicated team of cybersecurity specialists, and so we are constantly looking at industry best practices and new technology. You're exactly right. I mean, this is a very, very rapidly moving area as we talk about digital ag, and of course, the threats associated that could come in around us with respect to data security are evolving rapidly. So I feel like this is going to be just an area that the entire industry needs to be vigilant about and continue to work on. I think there's space for us to collaborate across industry-wide, competitors or not, to figure out how do we go ahead and safeguard data. And while the OIDA project, which is about how does data get transmitted, which is more about an API type of approach, I do think there's work to do on how do we really work across the industry on data security, because it's evolved daily.
Thank you. My time's expired. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentlewoman. Now the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the witnesses, and I turn first to Dr. Stern, and I'm over here, Dr. Stern. The Climate Corporation, I see San Francisco is on that list. Is that part of a Google initiative that's come together with Monsanto that's part of this package of Climate Corporation?
No, the Climate Corporation is, if I understand the question, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Monsanto.
Yes.
And maybe I misunderstood the.
But was it generated within Monsanto, or was it?
Oh, okay. No, it was a private company that we purchased 2 years ago, just about now. And it was started 6 years earlier and predominantly was developing this technology for the crop insurance business. And we both felt from the Climate Corporation of Monsanto saw how you could use big data and analytics to actually influence a lot more operations on the farm than just insurance.
Could you tell us just a little bit about the genesis of Climate Corporation forming, who the brains are behind that?
Yeah, sure. So the founders were executives at Google 10 years ago or so and left. David Freeberg, who is the CEO of the company, started a company called Weatherbill, which was really focused on, hey, there's a bunch of industries out there that weather impacts their success. Golf courses, ski resorts, bike rentals, that type of thing. And so that was the genesis of the business. It evolved into a core competency of weather prediction, weather forecasting, weather data. And today, we still get 3 million weather feeds a day, which feeds into the agronomic model. So that was the origin. And
I appreciate that. That puts that together and links up with the memory that I have of that. And now I want to just try if I can summarize what you can do with Climate Corporation and the association with Monsanto. And I'm just thinking in terms of, I come from the heart of the Corn Belt, so I think in terms of this, monitoring rainfall and grid across the field, and monitoring the humidity and the sunshine, the growing days that we have, the growing units that we have, and then being able to send maybe a text or an email to the producer that says, you've got a window here of your nitrogen has either leached down or been uptake into the plant, and you've got a window here of 18 hours before you're going to get an inch and a half of rain. You better side dress 20 pounds in. Is that some of what you do?
you nailed it. That's exactly what we do. And there's tremendous use cases right now, and I'll just give you the nitrogen advisor in the fall application. We just had a large grower in central Illinois just did that. They looked at the nitrogen advisor. They recognized that through the modeling that and what the weather is, if they applied last week, they were going to lose about 20 pounds because a rainstorm was coming in. They delayed that application for a week, and they felt they saved a lot of money and put the right amount of nitrogen down that was going to ultimately not leach. So I think that's exactly right how you.
So this science squeezes more production and gives you an opportunity to ration inputs to match up with the weather patterns that you've seen and the ones that you see coming.
Yes, that's exactly.
And can you monitor also then for either insect or plant disease?
Yeah, we have a large program. We have a program right now developing what we call looking at disease, and stress, and pests. And a lot of that will come from satellite imagery. It could come from drone information over the field. It also utilizes our understanding of the germplasm, what's planted there, different, just like humans have different susceptibility to different diseases. Well, different germplasms of corn have different susceptibilities. And so the power of big data and data analytics is you can bring all that information together, weather, soil, humidity, what's being planted in the field, and begin to make predictions about what the outcomes could be and allow growers to make better decisions. And so pests and disease are, a lot of diseases are windborne. So just understanding wind and wind direction, you could be able to go ahead and help growers, if you will, downwind in understanding that disease pathogens could be coming their way.
Then I'd like to turn to Mr. Tiller, and I thought you was excellent testimony, and please tell Monty that. But I was fascinated because it's the narrative that you have is that you're out there as a producer, a fourth-generation farmer. You saw the need to integrate this information. When I first saw that need in our construction company, I went in and tried to find somebody in business that could integrate that information. They told me what you need is a wife. Well, I had one, but she wasn't on that task. So,
Well, you're scaring me. I don't know where this is going. So.
well, I think that you've really brought a big picture here together, and it sounds to me like it's all the data that you could possibly ask for and want and need brought together, integrated from sources that are formed elsewhere, but synced together through macros and irrelational databases that you can use in a fashion that's friendly, user friendly. And the second that I've got, I'd just like to ask, how much of what Dr. Stern has proposed is already integrated into your operation?
Actually, what he's proposing, this is cutting-edge stuff. I mean, Climate Corp, there are some others that are all developing algorithms and processes to do this. We call that the best of tools. Climate Corp may win that best of tools. That doesn't affect us because we have a database of information that we hope someday Climate Corp writes against. And what I mean, write against that data, and we may want to store it. We'll have to work through those things. And I think as we grow in numbers of growers who want to do it this way, we'll have companies want to engage us in that pattern. But there are Climate Corp and others that are literally, it's cutting edge stuff I'm watching, especially, you mentioned drones. And if those get cleared by FAA, you're going to see literally a lot more go on, plant health monitoring, when you don't have to worry about cloud cover and those sorts of things. So does that answer your question?
It does, and I appreciate all your testimony. I yield back.
Demos time's expired, actually. Ms. Custer, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. I'm from New Hampshire, much smaller state, much smaller farms. We have 4,400 total farms. 470,000 acres. That's probably describing one farm of my colleagues here. And we have a strong agriculture economy, and I'm very excited to report that we're actually growing by 5% increase in new farms. A lot of young people coming, starting new farms. So I would just love if any of you could comment on whether there's any application to a smaller farm model or a collection of farms in a smaller farm economy, and how that might help. We have a lot of specialty crops, a lot of value-added products, maple syrup and such, and just if there's anything you could comment.
So just in general, the neat thing about this technology, it's scalable. It's precision ag, and so it gets down to not just a single field, but even sub-field level. So whether you're farming 10 acres or whether you're farming 10,000 acres, the value proposition and what these tools can be used for on the farm is the same. So first of all, I think it spans the farm size issue, which is great. With respect to specialty crops, early on right now, we're looking at some specialty crop applications. It's the magnitude of the data that you need around those crops in order to go ahead and begin to understand how you can build algorithms. But at least for us right now, our focus is, as you can imagine, is on the large row crops. But we certainly believe these tools are applicable. And in California, there are other companies that are actually looking at some of the high-value specialty crops that are grown in the Central Valley. So I'm very optimistic that these technologies will find their way into both specialty crops and smallholder farmers in the U.S. as well as to broadacre crops.
Could I add a little bit to that?
Sure, yeah.
We've taken the view at Growers Information Services Cooperative that all those farmers are important. We've had some very small farmers come to us and want to be part of that, and we encourage them to do so. And the point would be that I would say around financial information, I don't care what size your farm is, you need a profit and loss statement. And so every organization needs that. It doesn't matter if you're 1 million acres or you're 200, you got to do those things. So how many factories do you have? Maybe you only have one field. That's still the same. You're taking it down to the field level. You're trying to decide, is it profitable? What can we do with it? Using data analytics to do that. And so it works. It's scalable. So I just want to make that point that we encourage small growers to join us.
And one of the things I think exciting about this is that the technologies tend to go down in price, right?
Yes.
So that's the only thing that happens. I mean, my combine doesn't go down in price when I trade it off. Anything else I buy, but my iPhone does, right? So we've got a chance that the technology here will decrease in price rather than increase.
And then just adding to that, I have a lot of dairy farmers. I'm just wondering if you've had any experience in livestock or dairy.
I think from an AGCO point of view, we also have a business called GSI. Part of that business is also producing protein systems that support feeding poultry and pork producers. And we're seeing a lot of value come out of those operations as far as data is concerned as well. Imagine you can watch the operation throughout the year, understand what the best conditions are for producing the best chickens or the best pigs, and then recreate those conditions based on that information. And now if you can aggregate that information with other pork and poultry producers, you can start to recreate that on every farm. So the value of data goes from row crops to high-value crops all the way down to livestock growers. And even in the dairies, we're seeing the same thing on the dairy side by, again, just recreating those same conditions where you got the best results.
Well, as you're talking, it reminds me that historically, I think we didn't call it data, we called it experience, and it was passed down from generation to generation, and we've had a lot of young farmers, so this is a new way for them to come into it. But just the reference to having a wife reminds me of a very quick story about I was in a dairy barn, and we were talking about they're actually birthing calves all year long, and I said, well, how do you know in this small operation if there's a problem with a birthing, and do you have somebody who stays up 24/7? How do you manage that? And the farm spouse looked up and she said, well, you see that window right there? And I said, yeah. And she goes, that's our bedroom, closest to the barn. She said, he can sleep through a normal birth that's not difficult, but as soon as he hears her having a hard time, he's up and out in the barn. So I thought, with all the technology in the world, you can't beat a system like that. But thank you.
Young lady yields back. Mr. Gibbs, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for the witnesses. I just want to first of all reiterate what the ranking member was saying about the environmentalists and that issue. And, I think it just needs said again that technology has improved production, and it also it protects the environment because we can pinpoint our inputs, and for people who might not know, you can be riding in a combine and at 5 miles an hour shelling corn and get real-time data on moisture, yield, and it's just incredible. And so that leads to the next part. I think what Dr. Farrell mentioned, about the EPA let those records go to the livestock farmers and some other cases. It's tantamount that we protect this data for several reasons. Obviously, I think it's a privacy issue, but I also think when you get this big data amassed enough, and before the trends of what's happening in the market conditions in the markets is made public, if in the wrong person's hands, you're open up for market manipulation and all kinds of problems. So I think that the industry has to work with the elected officials and get this right because technology is moving fast and we have to get that right. I'm trying to, I guess, understand the technology we put up in the cloud, and I think Dr. Stern, for the farmers to be able to use this, because you get all this data, and it doesn't do us a whole lot of good. Well, I'm a farmer, so I can say it doesn't do us a whole lot of good because I include myself. And you can't, unless you can really analyze it, and that's what they have to go to, to your respective entities to do that. And so I think you are very supportive, all of you there, to have protections in place. So whoever entity that I as a farmer can say, here's our contract, you can't upload that, at least maybe in the aggregate maybe you can, but not in the individual cases, and you're all agreeable on that, right? Go ahead, Dr. Stern, if you got a comment.
Yeah, I think the way, to be clear, the way it kind of works right now in the system is that we have a contract, an agreement with an individual grower who owns the data. They agree to share that data, and in the agreement, it's very clear on what we will use the data for. And the Farm Bureau standards also help an awful lot on making sure growers can have a lens from which to go ahead and look at those agreements. Once that data is uploaded into the cloud, okay, the concept for to aggregate it allows us to go ahead and look at it as a whole. The individual data itself help us look specifically back at their farm. And it's typically an input into a broader model that we've developed that allows that specific information to help go back and give specific
I think it's
information.
also clear to me that we need to pass legislation so even the government can't come in and do it. Agreeable?
I think, I would agree that but I'll leave it.
Dr. Farrell?
Well, I just want to address one point that you made, Congressman, and it's a good point about one of the concerns that producers have had is the potential for market manipulation, because if you want to know what the corn market's going to do, it sure would be nice if you had the means of instantaneously knowing what the corn harvest exactly looked like.
It's like insider information.
I'm glad that you used that term, because I've actually kind of researched that issue a little bit, and it's not, by definition, insider information. It's just really good market intelligence. And so the current legal framework that they have really wouldn't prohibit anyone from doing that. So that may be one thing that we need to address is if we're going to entrust someone with the capability of being a data aggregator, should they have the ability to use that information in the commodities marketplace? That's just another policy issue.
And Mr. Hurst, I know you.
Yeah, I guess we all agree that the farmer owns the data. It becomes a little more complicated than that. Does the landlord own the data? Does the crop rent tenant own the data? Does the cash rent landlord own the data? Does the applicator that's driving a machine through my field that I've hired, is that my data? Is his data? Is he transmitting it? Is it leaving my farm? I don't know. Lots of stuff still to be worked out.
Of course, my opinion is if the farmer's paying cash rent, it's the farmer's data. That's why I probably would lean that way unless someone else. And,
That's exactly how we look at it as well, that it's between agreements between us and the farmer, and it's up to the farmer within their land lease agreement to determine with the landowner who, their own arrangement around the data.
Yeah. And Mr. Hurst, I'm sure you're enjoying your presidency of the Missouri Farm Bureau. In my past life, I was president of the Ohio Farm Bureau, and I knew one of your predecessors and lived in the Boot Hill of Missouri.
President Cruz.
That's right. Thanks. I yield back.
Jimmy goes back. Mr. Aguilar, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panel for joining. I represent an area in Southern California. And I was picking up, and Mr. Hurst, you mentioned it in your testimony, and I think we've just kind of elaborated on that as well. But the discussion of your term was a data-driven partner, and just kind of understanding, what that could mean. In my district is the corporate headquarters for Esri, which is a geographic information systems company that is quite large, and their relationship, and they often partner with USDA. And you mentioned this discussion of a data-driven partner, and I want to just expand on what that could look like, and could there be a role, while I am completely in favor of making sure that that this does remain the rights of the farmers. Is there a role for that data-driven partner to play a role in connecting the USDA program or aggregating the data that can be helpful? Because as Dr. Farrell mentioned, this depends on having that large number of inputs that would be necessary. And is that a role that these technology companies can play?
Yeah. Yes. As far as the USDA, it would be very handy. When I make my report, my crops each spring, a report is generated at the FSA. I literally walk that or drive it. My crop insurance agent is quite some distance away, and he enters those figures by hand. So I have traveled to the office, the FSA office, 20 miles from home, given them that information. They don't have the ability to talk to my crop insurance agent, and all of this information resides on my thumb drive that I have in my from my planner, which tells me exactly how many acres of all these crops I planted, and nobody can talk to each other. So without any question, all that information is already accessible to the FSA, to my crop insurance agent, but I have no way to transfer it in an efficient manner, and that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Dr. Stern?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Hurst. This technology will drive efficiencies through agricultural production in a variety of different ways, not just simply productivity gains on the farm, but I think the interactions with the crop insurance agencies, USDA, FSA, is a great example. All this data is digitized. The farm is digitized. It's going to be stored in places, and it's going to be organized, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to be more efficient from the grower perspective and from the government perspective by us working together with the USDA to find ways that this specific information can be transferred electronically. I mean, the technology is there to do it.
Right.
And we hear that from growers all the time, and it's an area that we, in fact, we feel that the tools that we're developing can actually be employed almost now to help do that. So big opportunity, in our opinion.
Thank you. Dr. Farrell?
No, I would just completely agree. And one of the things that Mr. Rushing and I were actually thinking of while we were having that discussion was two initiatives that are out there, and Dr. Stern alluded to this, the Open Ag Data Alliance and the Ag Gateway program, which are two, I don't know if open source is necessarily the right word to use. I wouldn't use that, but collaborative efforts to develop some of those data transmission and storage standards to really facilitate some of the data transfers that Mr. Hurst and Dr. Stern were referring to.
I think if you look at the history of farm equipment, you can remember years ago when you went to hook up an implement in the tree line and it didn't have the right couplers on the end of it, and then we standardized to one type of coupler in the industry. It's a simple example, but then after that you saw ISOBUS come. And ISOBUS now allowed data to transfer freely between different brands and different products and of different types of equipment. I think now what you're seeing with the Ag Gateway initiative through SPADE and also a project called ADAPT is to come up with standardized approaches to transmitting data. I know that many of the government entities are also involved in those discussions, as well as farm software providers, farm machinery manufacturers. All those guys are together now and looking at ways that they can standardize on how that data is transferred and used. There's also things outside of the OADA I know that is in the industry now, and those things are like also data co-ops. So data cooperatives are starting to come up, sponsored by different universities, so that there can be some neutral places where anybody that wants to consume that data can come in and consume it based on the farmer's permissions.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Dr. Benechak, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, this sort of reminds me of, I'm a doctor, so this information technology and data kind of is in the medical field, and how, you can't get the information from one place to another. So tell me, there are two questions that the testimony has got me thinking about, and one of them is the ownership of the data. And one of you mentioned the fact that if John Deere, or I don't know who the ownership of the tractor is, that maybe you don't own the data, which seems about as logical as if you buy a computer, that the data in the computer should be yours, not Microsoft or whatever, right? So tell me, how does that actually occur? I mean, I don't understand it, frankly. Who would sign a contract like that?
Yeah. It's a contractual agreement. I don't necessarily personally like it. Most farmers I know, and I'd like to get Blake's take here in a moment, they don't personally like that, but at the moment there are, and they're not alone. They're not alone. I mean, John Deere's agreement they use the word control, so they take the word own out and they say, you can control your data. We at Growers Information Services Cooperative take the position that the grower needs to own his data. And I used to use the example of, you park your car in your neighbor's garage long enough, he'll forget that it's under your control, and before long he'll think he owns it. And maybe he does. So, Blake, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a controversy about the ability to go in and work on the software, which is they're very, very, large corporations are very, very, they don't want you modifying their software. And then the data. One of the other questions that comes, the ownership question that comes up, I understand that I own my data, but when it goes into a database, do I own 1/100th or 1/1000th or 1/1,000,000th of that database? I have a feeling that may be a place where some controversy could occur, because the farmer might well feel that he still has some ownership interest in that database. The person that holds the database may have the opposite opinion.
You mentioned that a co-op. Now, is it, to me, the data should be like a farm co-op. You know,
That's
you
the
know what
way
I mean?
we operate.
That's-
Same principle as a corn marketing cooperative.
Right,
We're
right.
at growers, we're at GIC, we are a data marketing cooperative. Where we're trying to be the data aggregator where we can bring that data together. I want to make a statement around the aggregate data. I mean, it is a huge question. And once we aggregate data, and we've got, let's say we've got 10,000 growers that are put together, because I want the data sets to be large enough where everybody's anonymized. You know, it's kind of like putting sugar in a cake. Once you bake the cake, show me how you're going to get the sugar out. You can't. So we've got to be big boys in agriculture. As a farmer, I've got a bit large operation. When I sign an agreement and say you can aggregate, I can't really expect to go back and pull that out. I'm just wanting to make sure the farmer's educated and understands that. That's all.
Right.
And at growers, we're very set on, let's make sure we educate them so that they understand once they've agreed to this aggregation, what that means.
So there's so many questions that come up about this to me. So if you buy this John Deere tractor, that you sign this contract, is that like a 20-year deal then? Or the tractors last a long time?
You know, as long as you want to use the controller there. I mean, there's sort of, I don't know how to best explain it because it's even confusing to me, even though I've dealt in the issue the last 4 or 5 years watching it evolve. It's the position they've taken. For whatever reason, I can't answer for them. I wish they were here to answer for themselves around it. But it is a position they've taken. I mean, and they've been very stern that, you know, they make great technology by the way they do.
Well, the other question that comes up is the interoperability of the data. You guys have kind of talked a little bit about it. So is it over different platforms? Is it coordinated?
It's all proprietary data. There's very seldom, there's a few formats, but for the
Well,
most
if
part.
one guy, if one county has a predominance of one company, and the next county over might use a different company, they can't aggregate that data and make use of it?
It's very tough, but you can do binary transformations where you can create your own way to actually take that data in and consume it. But for the most part, you've got Ag Gateway and you've got OEDA, two different, I call them standards groups, trying to develop standards around how we could make this happen. And it's in the works, and it'll be in the works.
Well, this is
a
a problem across all this data, you know, not only for you guys, but for medicine, and that's exactly the problem we face here. And it's, to me, you're being held hostage by the, I don't know, I call them data weenies, because they're the only people that know how to work it, and you have to pay them so much a month.
And that's a portability issue. So when I want to leave a particular chemical company, or I'm talking about regional vendors, and I've got onto their digital platform and I'm ready to move and I'm unhappy with them and I want to go to someone else, will they make my data portable so I can leave? Some will, some won't, and some will make it portable. It's not a very good format for me to consume it with another set of software. So that's really where it goes.
Thank you, my friend.
Gentleman's time to start. Ms. Plaskett, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for this lively discussion on a topic which is difficult at best for some of us. But I wanted to expound on a question that my colleague, Ms. Custer, brought up to you with regard to smaller farmers. And one of the questions was, we talked about that there is a benefit to the smaller farmers in doing this. But is there a decreased benefit to the smaller farmers in relation to the larger ones in terms of the data collection and, you know, the cost benefit that goes into them doing it in comparison to the larger farmers? Does it push them out of the market of benefit in doing this?
I'll take a swing at that one, and I'll take off my lawyer hat and put on my ag economics professor hat.
Those are big hats.
Yes, they are, and it takes a large hat rack to keep them all straight. I think there really are some important benefits for our smaller producers, and the reason that I say that is because anytime that you're dealing with volatility in the commodities market, which is arguably the entire history of forever, when you've got that volatility, the producers in the long run that come out ahead are the low-cost producers because they can withstand those changes in prices, and if they can stay the most efficient low-cost producers, they're the ones that are going to survive. Typically, that's put small producers at a disadvantage because they just don't have the economies of scale. They may not have the capital structure to withstand those kind of buffeting influences of the market. But with the kind of data tools that we've talked about today, to some extent, they have the same decision-making capacities that a much larger operation might have. If they can have access to the insights afforded by some of the big data analytics that we've discussed, they can make management decisions with the same level of precision and information intelligence that the larger producers can. So I think that there are some real advantages from the small producers from those technologies. Now, that's if we're looking at coming from big data down to the individual level. But that's a two-way street, and one way that we can have to really participate in making those management decisions as best we can is by having good farm-level data. And that requires sensing technologies that we've talked about, and sometimes that's on the larger equipment that may be beyond the operational scale of those smaller producers. So that's kind of the bad news for small farms and ranches, but the good news is, as we mentioned earlier, as that technology drives forward, we're seeing ever decreasing costs of integrating that technology. We're seeing it put on smaller and smaller implements and implements and tractors, those types of things.
This may be where cooperatives really work in favor of the smaller farmers banding together in terms of doing the data.
Absolutely. I think we're going to see those costs driven down, and I think we're going to see more access to more types of equipment systems that have that technology. So I think it's only going to get closer and closer to the small producer.
Just another comment on that. I think, so for instance, if you look at our nitrogen advisor, that's built on a large data set. Overwhelming majority of it is publicly available data or data that we ourselves invested in our research farms to generate. So the scale piece, that if you have a larger farmer, for some reason they have more information, it's going to drive more information for them versus a smallholder farmer, that's not really the basis of it. You know, we're looking at it field by field, and I would say at least also the way we price the products are per acre. So it's, you know, and ultimately growers are going to make a decision on whether or not that's the appropriate value. But I truly believe the technology is very scalable, and I completely agree with Dr. Farrell that I think in some ways it's a leveling technology.
Great. The other question I had was, we've talked specifically about crops and farmers. Can you talk about how this translates to livestock?
As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of opportunities to utilize this data loop inside of things like poultry, beef production, and pork production.
So can you give an example of that?
So, for example, if you can identify within the crop cycle of raising, say, poultry, you can identify specific environments or specific conditions where you produce the best chickens. And you can identify that throughout the crop cycle, identify what you did as far as feed, what the temperature was in the house, how what water, what nutrients you used. Then you can recreate those conditions based on understanding that cycle and when those events happened. So that's one place where we've seen it being used. We've also seen it being used in milk production, where you're able to see what types of feeds are used and then be able to recreate those same conditions to replicate the productivity.
Okay, Dr. Stern,
I'll give one more example for an integrated farmer who's producing, maybe they're a dairy farmer, but they're also producing row crops. Again, our nitrogen advisor allows them to use the manure that they will be spreading on their field as an input into that calculation. So we take that calculation into the algorithm, and it allows us then to understand overall fertility in the field, so they don't necessarily have to go ahead and apply any more nitrogen fertilizer to that field. So that's a little bit of different twist, but it's how livestock and row crop operations can integrate with the technology.
Thank you so much.
Your latest time expired. Mr. Davis, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hurst, thanks for being here. Your written testimony mentions some key differences in big data in agriculture from the big data that's collected about individuals, say from Google searches or social media interaction. The difference seems to be not just in the data that's collected, but also the risk that the collection of that data imposes, say for information, maybe on some pesticide applications or use of GMO seeds. Is there anything that we haven't asked you regarding these aspects of data that you would like to relate to the committee that can be helpful in us determining future policies?
Yeah, the point I was trying to make was that if Google or Amazon knows that I like to read murder mysteries, it's probably not, it's a value to them as a marketer, but it's not something I care if anybody else knows. It may be that farmers are nervous about public knowledge of the applications they use of pesticides, even though they're applying them well within the prescribed limits and following all the labels. So this information is more sensitive in that sense. It comes very close to very close to the same level of sensitivity as financial information or social security numbers or any of those things. And one of the other points I guess I was trying to make when talking about that is we freely give that information to Facebook, right? I read somewhere that every customer or every member of Facebook, their value is worth $20 to Facebook. So you think about the average person's buying power, and then you multiply that by 20 or 30 or 40 to get to the buying power of farms. And our information has a great deal of value as farmers. It would really be nice as we go through this process that we keep in mind that it would be helpful to agriculture if we were able to monetize that in ways other than just the benefits it makes for my productive capabilities.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hurst. Dr. Stern, you mentioned that a farmer in central Illinois, the breadbasket of America, of course, since I represent there, was able to use precision agriculture and data to determine when it would be correct, when it would be best to put nitrogen in the field. I hope that that farmer was in my district. But can you explain, besides the fact that all good things happen right out of central Illinois, can you explain to us how we can make that even more, we can make that more useful as we move into the future?
Sure, and this farmer was just south of Springfield, so I don't know whether or not that's...
Probably my home county
Yeah,
in Christian
yeah.
County in Taylorville.
I think we're...
The best farmers.
And in my testimony, I said we're just on the cusp of this digital revolution, and so we're very early days in this technology. But so this is just a simple example of timing, understanding how much nitrogen was left in their field from after the growing season, because that's what the advisor does, and understanding weather. In the future, if we just stick to nitrogen or fertility in general, so it's not just nitrogen, but whether it be phosphorus and potassium, as we expand the scope, we'll have a better picture of fertility in the field. And we will get, right now, our advisor looks at the entire field.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to subfield levels, where we're looking at, Surgo soil maps or other information from that's generated in the field that allows us to say this part of the field has a different fertility profile than this part of the field. And the third piece of information that will come in will be around the genetics and what's being planted. Different genetic lines of corn will respond to nitrogen differently. So when you begin to bring all this together, and this is in our roadmap of products that we're going to be developing, you can begin to see more of an operating plan that we can work with growers to develop that covers fertility broadly on a subfield level, all the way to how to optimize what's being planted, both from a seeding population as well, where seeds are being planted. So that's just a little snapshot of I think, the power of the technology.
Thank you. And I would urge each of you as we leave this hearing today to also ensure that when you come back to us, help us understand what government can do to halt technology like this and what we can do to stop that from being implemented out here in Washington, D.C. at the policy level. And in my last few seconds, Dr. Farrell, my colleague from Oklahoma is gone, so I was going to ask you to explain to him what an iTunes agreement was. But yes. But has anybody told you you sound just like our former colleague, Corey Gardner? I had my head down and I was thinking, Corey's in this place.
I would defer to my colleague, Mr. Fisher. I'll leave it to him to let me know that fact. He had not yet apprised me of that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, those of you who may not know who Corey Gardner is, he got demoted to the U.S. Senate. So I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time expired. Mr. Yoho, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I appreciate you being here, and I think it's fascinating to see the advancement of technology and how fast it's going. Dr. Stern, the information you're getting is coming from satellites. Are those your own, or are you tapped into the Landsat satellites of NASA's?
Yeah, we part of the information we get is from satellites, but we actually purchase satellite imagery from a variety of different vendors. They're not our satellites.
Yeah, we did an ag seminar in our district and showing the farmers what they can get off the Landsat. Of course, they can gather all this information on their own. Of course, the thing they're missing is the algorithms that, to assimilate that stuff to come out with the recommendations. It's a whole different ballgame. So, you can get the raw data, but to put it into practical terms. Dr. Farrell, you had brought up, the CAFO situations, concentrated animal feeding units, and we know what happened with the EPA. They gave that information out mistakenly, and we just need to make sure that information, when it's collected, that the the farmer or the person that it pertains to is protected. I think there's got to be a way that we up here can protect the citizens. Yes, people have a right to know some things, but I think on situations like that, it's a national security situation. If you look at one of our big feeding operations, and of course I come from the state of Florida, and we've got some of the ranches down there, hundreds of thousands of acres. It's a very precarious situation if somebody were to get into that. And working off what my colleague here, Mr. Davis, had brought up, was that if you guys, you're out there in the industry, you're out there in the field, coming up with the ideas that we can institute on this end to protect you out there so that you can continue to do what you're doing. And one of the things in our district is we've got 6 drone companies. One of them is developing software right now where they can go over a farm field and they can take an image of the cattle and they can predict, how many young calves there are, what the average body weight is, and it's just going to revolutionize the ag industry. But in order to be able to do that, they have to have the permission and the policies in place so that they can fly the drone. And so, again, use this committee as something to move that legislation forward so that we can benefit all of agriculture, yet protect the privacies of the neighbors and of the individual. Where do you see this going? I mean, what do you see the biggest challenge that we're seeing? I mean, you've mentioned a lot of that, and we'll start with you, Dr. Farrell, of the impediments maybe in the industry.
I say this with the bias of someone who works in cooperative extension, so I'm out there always, talking to those producers, and I really think, at least at this point in time, the barrier may be almost informational. And what I mean by that is I think that farmers can see the benefits that this technology, promises, but there's just a hesitancy to engage with that technology because either they feel the current safeguards aren't adequate or they just don't understand what those safeguards are. And so really I think the technology is being driven incredibly quickly. I think it'll be there when the producer is ready. I think one of the best things that we can do is to have continued educational efforts to make sure that those producers read and understand those agreements and the contracts they enter into with the service providers so that they feel comfortable with the protections that they have, and to facilitate the dialogue that we've already got in establishing some of those basic principles of data ownership, rights, privacy, and disclosure of uses, and really overarching that principle of transparency.
Okay, and I go along with the lines of Mr. Gibbs. If I'm paying for that information's mine, and the service agreements and all that. I know that's got to be worked out, and those are things that we got to look at. Mr. Rushing, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think one of the big challenges is going to be data standardization, making sure that there's specific formats that everyone can use, and that's going to open up more choices for the farmer to be able to choose what types of equipment, what types of products, what types of services that he wants to be able to use as well. So I think if any support can come, it's in helping establish those data standards within the industry and also across the world so that we can build this equipment and the services and products to communicate with each other.
Do you feel that's something that should be done in the private industry, those standards, keep the government out of it, because we don't want to have, show up and say, we're here from the government to help you?
Definitely.
Okay.
It's got to be done by the industry. And a lot of the industry organizations we talked about today are working in that direction, but it can't come fast enough.
Anybody else want to weigh in the last 30 seconds?
Yeah, I would just add that I think ultimately growers are always looking for new technology to optimize their operation, and this is really new technology, and so they're going to need to work with it for a little bit and see the value that these digital tools bring to their farm. And in doing that, they will become more trustworthy of it. They will understand the value that it brings, and they'll be more engaged in the technology. I will just say 70% of growers out there right now are touching different pieces of this technology, so they're very receptive to it. Lastly, broadband across, with respect to how this committee could help expanding broadband, you have to move the data around.
Thank you.
That's important.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kelly?
Thing that's bad about being last is, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, or very close to last, is most of the great questions have been asked. But I've been thinking about this thing while you've talked, and there's so many competing interests here. You've got data, which is the farmers. They own the farm. They own the yield that comes off of that crop. They own several things. You've got Climate Corporation, which owns a lot of the weather data and those type of things. There's soil samples, which may be owned by a whole lot of different people. And then you have the algorithms and the things that turn that data from being data into actionable information or something that you can use. And then you've got the collector. You know, John Deere owns the tractor that has the GPS on, that owns that. It's very difficult to make sure that each one of those parties is represented in the correct way that doesn't give them an unfair competitive advantage over the other. I shouldn't be able to sell you my product and use that as an unfair competitive advantage to make sure that you use only this, whether it be from any one of those sources. So do any of you, and Dr. Farrell, you may have a better, how do we keep people from using that as an unfair competitive advantage? And how do we make sure that the smaller farmers, or that the farmers who are sometimes not as technologically savvy or don't have as much information, how do we make sure they're educated when they make those decisions of how to sell that?
You saved a good question for last. I don't think they took all the good ones. I think that was an excellent question. And it's tough because right now, I was actually just looking at some information earlier this week that showed, you know, the number of companies that were evolving in the space of ag data management, transfer, analysis, and it's pretty large. It's not going to stay that way. We're going to see industry consolidation. We almost always see industry consolidation as we go on, and that's tough because the marketplace gives you choices when you've got choices that you can make with your dollar. And at least at this point in time, we let the consumer kind of pick who's going to best serve their needs and their ownership interests in that data. That consolidation is going to come. I keep going back to the concept that we've had with success thus far in the dialogue amongst all the stakeholders. And I think thus far that has really served this industry well. I think we're seeing, and I'm impressed by that in the fact that I think we've seen the concerns of the consumer, here the farmer and rancher, represented really well and very early on in this process. I've been really amazed at how quickly we've come to a consensus in the industry about some of these principles. I think the key to the question that you're raising is to maintain that consensus process and to make sure that those principles are embodied in the contracts that these service providers are going to be using, because we can have principles all day long, but they're not legally enforceable until they're in that agreement that farmer or rancher has signed. And so I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is, like we talked about, making sure that farmers and ranchers understand what that framework looks like and making sure that they make educated decisions about which service provider they choose based on which service provider best fits their needs and their interests in that data.
You know, and I'll open it up to everyone, but it's very important to me that we don't allow people to make uneducated decisions about what they're giving away. And there's a value to all of those products. And it's also important that one person, because of information or because of the size of their organization, that they don't use that either as an unfair advantage, or also that we share those profits that should be shared. And I'm kind of looking out for protecting the little guy. I want to make sure that someone's not taking an unfair advantage of them. Any other ideas?
Well, I'd like to, that's the reason for something like a data cooperative, where you can actually give that small grower or all the growers literally the power of a voice, very educated around what's going on in the industry. It's a very evolving industry. I mean, just from what you're hearing here, you can begin to see very quickly what's going on. And so that's why, of course, I'm proposing what we're doing. But as a grower, there was a reason that I wanted to go down this path. I didn't think that I could stand alone and really keep that place of really significance, where I really said it should be a grower-centered world where I'm talking about my data.
As we went through I'm sorry.
I just have time for one final point. While doing that and taking care of the small guy, we also don't need to stifle innovation by doing that, and I understand that too. And if you can comment real briefly, Mr. Hurst, and I yield back the rest of my time after your answer.
Yes, our transparency evaluation, all the principles we've developed, all those things were to make sure the farmers had good information when they made these decisions. Thanks.
Gentleman's time expired. Mr. Austin Scott, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for being here today. One of the things that we talk about with regard to the data, whether it's control or ownership, I think one of the other things that we're going to make sure, or need to make sure that we address, is if that data is submitted to any of the government agencies, is whether it is or is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And certainly that's private data, and somehow we need to make sure that we get that language correct when we do that. So I want to ask you this question, Mr. Rushing, because AGCO has taken the position that the farmer should own and control the data. I certainly agree with you on that. Other companies have taken a different position on that. Why has AGCO taken the position that you have, and how is the farmer's ownership of that data protected in the agreements, and why would other companies take a different approach?
So I think the first thing to make sure that we realize is AGCO is a machinery company. So we're focused on machinery and assets. We're not necessarily so focused on crop production data. We can't provide services, goods and services that are going to benefit the grower by understanding a lot of that crop production data. It's our job to take the prescription that's developed or capture the data in the field in regards to yield or how something was applied, and then utilize that in the machine. So make sure the machine's capable. So our position has been that the grower or the farmer owns the data. He will give whomever he wants permission to utilize that data. And as a result, we built 2 pipes. We built a pipe that's specifically focused on the machine, because if I can see that farmer's machinery data, say for example, machinery health, I can then respond to that farmer with additional services that are going to benefit him. One of the biggest challenges farmers have is downtime. If they're down in the field and they're not operating, then it's just like a factory being down, it's not being productive. So how we can utilize that information based on how the machines are performing, we can come back and we provide services to keep that machine running, keep it repaired, keep it optimized, keep it performing like it's supposed to be performing in the field. So from that respect, we want to make sure that when we say to the farmer, you own your data, but if you'll let us see it, we can provide you value in return through these services and through these other opportunities. For crop production data, though, we can't. So what we say to the farmer, it's your data, and not only is it your data, we're going to facilitate your transfer of that information to whomever you want to transfer it to. And also in the process, as it's transferred through the pipe, it's deleted. We will never look at it. We will never use it. We'll never try to understand your operation from an agronomic standpoint, because we can't provide you any value in that regard. And that's basically why we've taken the position that we've taken. Now, we're making connections to a lot of folks here on this panel to make sure that they can consume that data if the farmer chooses. But again, the farmer will make that choice, whether it's machinery data shared with us or it's agronomic data or task data shared with some of their other ag service providers.
And so if I buy one of your machines, is there a certain computer system that I have to use for your machine, or can I purchase different computer systems that might collect the data? And would that be available on other companies who don't share your belief that the farmer should own the data? If I buy a machine where the company thinks they own the data, do I have the ability to take their data collection out and put my own in?
The farmer can always select a aftermarket solution that he can plug into the machine to collect specific amounts of data. It might not necessarily be everything on the machine. The OEM or the original equipment manufacturer has a lot of access to the technology on the machine that an aftermarket provider wouldn't have, but there is an option for a farmer to buy an aftermarket solution and install it on the machine.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be quick here. I just wanted to welcome Mr. Russian to our hearing today. Nice to have a fellow Georgian
Thank you.
up here with us, and thank you for being here. Thank you, and thanks to all for your testimony. And I would just encourage you to do this, to all get together and let's solve this problem so the farmer gets what the information he needs, but also he gets paid for furnishing that information. It's a fair deal, and I encourage you all to get together and work this out, and so that you know what happens when Congress gets involved. And so, but I think it'd be better if you could do this privately, and I thank you for your work. I yield back.
Jim yields back. I want to thank our panel. This has been a refreshing hearing this morning. You're not coming here looking for solutions. You're coming here just to tell the Ag Committee about things that are working in the private sector. I echo Mr. Allen's comments. The better job you do about fixing all the problems that you're already recognizing in the collegial manner in which you're working across interests is encouraging to me, and the more we can do that. There may very well, though, be some things that we need to do to protect markets and others. I've been told a story about the high-frequency traders figured out that the closer they got their servers to the market, the amount of time that they saved, you can blink your eye, and they can break that blink of an eye down into segments. And by saving a couple of segments of a blink of an eye, by getting closer, then they could execute their deals quicker. And so this data on, particularly during harvest, is going to be stunningly valuable. And so as we walk this path, we'll need to get your help and others to make sure that, that we don't have unintended consequences by people trying to exploit a new data. The other thing is that early adopters, like Mr. Tiller and others, you're willing to make the investment ahead of time, seeing the vision down the road, but later adopters have got to do it on a cost-benefit analysis. It's got to, the money they save from the value of the data going and making those decisions has got to be greater than the costs of doing it. And what I heard this morning is that movement along that line as well is that you'll get cheaper and cheaper, so that more folks who want to adopt it just based on the cost-benefit analysis more than than just wanting to be on the leading edge will be important. Under the rules of committee, the record for today's hearing were made open for 10 days to receive additional material and supplemental written responses from the witness to any questions posed by a member. This hearing on Committee on Agriculture is adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.
You got